Well, guys, good morning. So this is week 2 of OK Coders, the back end. So let's go over the homework that we did for week 1. Let me screen share here. So, okay, let's just go through these in pieces. Let me close some of these things here. Okay, the first assignment was a dice roll. Pretty easy. Most of you guys got this. Some of you guys had a problem with getting it start at 1 instead of 0, but well, does anyone have any comments on the homework before I actually go through them? Well, problems or comments?
Sometimes I didn't understand what you wanted us to do. I mean, it's vague. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and especially on the query params parsing, because I think exactly 100% of you guys missed it, because that obviously means that's not your fault, it's my fault for poor instructions. So I'll do a better job of being much more explicit there.
Okay. I mean that's the only thing I have to say is there's not a lot of instruction, and I understand, like this is your input and this should be your output. But getting there, it was difficult sometimes for me.
Yeah, the approach, and I guess I should have prefaced this, the approach kind of that I was going for is with these here that I'm basically just asking you for a function, and you're going to write a function that when called will return a specific value. So and I tried making it as a little bit vague intentionally because, there's 100 different ways to skin a cat, especially for some of these things like the number stats. You could do this a whole bunch of different ways. But I will try getting a little more detailed and specific there just to help, or at least for the first couple till you guys get a hang of it. So, because I know the query params parser, I think a lot of you guys were frustrated with that because, everybody who turned in homework to me, I basically rejected that one there because everybody did something with Express, and that was my fault, so I apologize for that. So let's get back to dice roll. So dice roll, getting a random number, we know that we can use math.random, right? So if we just start with, if we didn't know, most of you guys knocked this out, so I don't think this will be a surprise to anybody. If we start with something like this, and we do a console.log of dice roll, and I run this a bunch of times, I'm going to see the values are, between 0 and 1, right? So it is, this here gives us a number 0, between 0 and 1. So this is inclusive of 0. So math.random can actually return a 0 for us, 0.0000, but it will never return a 1. So that's good to know, right? Because now we can take that, knowing that, all these numbers are small. Well, we can scale that by multiplying by 6, because most dies have 6 sides. And that is also my fault, because the homework I didn't specify was a 20-sided die or whatever, but no one really exploited that loophole. So, but we run this and we see, okay, cool, we're getting bigger numbers, but obviously, die don't have decimal places, right? So, well, we can take this and we can round it. So let's go ahead and we'll take this in baby steps. First of all, here's our number here. Now we're going to say, hey, let's take our result and multiply it by 6. And then we're going to go ahead and do math.round on it. So if we do a math.round on results, and let's return results. Now I'm being pretty pedantic here. This whole thing can be done in a one-liner. I just want to go through a step-by-step in case somebody had problems with this. That way it's not a surprise. how I got there. So we look at this, we see 4, 3. So notice that we still see 0 in here, right? So that's not going to work for us. We see 6, we see 1. So one thing that we can do is, because this thing here now essentially has a range between 0 and 6, right? Because if this returns 1.95, we multiply it by 6, it'll be 5.7, 5.8, something like that, and it'll get rounded up to 6. Well, if it returns something closer to 0 times 6, it'll still be close to 0, it'll get rounded down. So one thing that we could do is offset this by 1, right? We can always add 1 to it. So now our range is, notice first of all we got a 7, so that's not going to work for us. We got a 5, a 4, 3, a 6, and we can go through here, and this is kind of a, we could create a loop here to test this, but one thing that we could do to make sure that we never end up with that 7, because the only time that 7 happens is if our math.round returns a 6, right? So that means that whatever our result here is going to be very close to 1. So instead of doing math.round, we can do math.floor, which means always round down. So if we always do that, because we know that math.random is guaranteed to never give us 1, if we always round down, then we know that this here will return a 5. So this essentially will return 0, between 0 and 5. So now if we run this, we could do this all day long, and we're going to see that our values are in the proper range. So in this whole thing here, so first of all, does anyone have any questions about that before I continue? Cheryl, are you good with that?
Yeah, I am.
Danny?
We're good here.
Okay, awesome. Elena? No.
Looks good.
Okay, I love it. And that's not going to work. Okay. So number stats. So this one here, we did something similar in class. So the only two things in here that were different in class was the minimum and maximum, and I saw that you guys did that a little bit differently, so which is really awesome. So now I'm going to take kind of what I requested here. So that's what I'm looking for. So okay, so function number stats, and for our nums. So there's a couple different ways to do this, right? We have an average, we have a minimum, we have a maximum, we have the length, we have the numbers. These here don't require any calculation, right? Because I can do something like var stats, and I can start this off pretty quick and get my array of numbers automatically, and the length is just going to be nums.length. So those two are essentially given for you, right? So then something like doing, oh, it's funny, I didn't even ask you for a total or anything like that, but no problem. So we could get, the average is essentially just going to be the sum of them. So I could do var sum. I could do, if you guys don't mind using reduce, if you guys are comfortable with that, this would just be nums.reduce a and b, a plus b with initial value of 0, right? So, and then stats.average is just going to be the sum divided by the stats.length. So if we run this,
Nope, nums.length.
It's going to be nums.length.
nums.length.
Stats.average. Right.
Well, stats.length is going to be the same as nums.length. So, yeah, hey, you know what? I will change this to nums.length. But yeah, they're the same exact value there. So we have our average here. So these last two, the min and max, we could do a loop and keep what the minimum value is, the maximum value, but we could also, I hope you guys know that there is a math.min function that it doesn't take an array, it takes individual arguments here. So But if you give it an array, that won't work, right? We see not a number. So there are a couple different ways. There's the ES6 way would be math.min dot call this, and then you give it an array of whatever you're trying to do. Let me see if that even works. Okay, dot apply. So you're taking this array and applying it as parameters to that function inside of this context. So this is, in my opinion, a terrible way to do it. Sorry, let me close my door here. It's pretty confusing, and I don't expect anyone to remember this. So this looks pretty scary. ES6 has something called a spread operator. We can do math.min, and we can add just 3 dots and ellipses, and then give it an array, and it will spread it out into individual arguments. So how many have you guys seen that before?
We've seen it in passing.
Okay. So this is definitely the preferred way to do it, because essentially then my min is just going to be math.min dot. I don't know what happened there with the autocomplete of nums, and then my max is going to be very similar, math.max spread. Wow, spread operator of nums there. So here's my min, here's my max, here's my average. And this here, we could just go ahead and put this in here as well, because we don't really need the sum here, so I could just move average in here as well, right? Because the average is going to be the total divided by nums dot length. So now I have something pretty clean here. And obviously I don't even have to use my stats variable, but that's okay. How many of you guys ended up with something like this?
Similar.
Yeah, Elaine, I saw yours. You used a spread operator, so I was pleased. Made me smile. Cheryl, Danny, Linda,
I use the spread operator.
you what?
I use the spread operator
Okay.
as well.
Yeah, I didn't use the spread operator. I used, when I sorted my array, I used the
Sorry, Linda. Seth muted you out. Okay, cool. Good job, Seth.
I didn't use the spread operator. I used the index from my sorted array.
Okay, so she used the index from her sorted array, so she would get.
Oh, okay. I did see that. Okay, and that's very clever. So yeah, there's 100 different ways to do this. So. Okay, let's go on to the next one here. So, the next assignment was the query params parser. I think this is the one that gave everybody trouble. So, what we're looking to do is just take a string of query params and convert it into an object. So, and these are kind of the 3 examples that I gave. So here, let's go ahead and. So let's start our function here. That's fine. I'll just call this my input string. So first thing that we need to do is we notice that the ampersands separate the different name value pairs, right? So we're going to do a split on these ampersands. So I'm going to say var, I'm going to call it pairs equals string dot split on my ampersand, and we'll do this in pieces. So here, I'll just return pairs for right now, and this is fantastic because I can just actually I need to console log around all these. That's okay.
Oh.
Okay, sorry, I'm butchering this. Okay, that's what that should equal, and okay, there we go. Okay, so this is kind of what the outputs I would expect, right? So let's see how close we get. So obviously we're not even close to it, but we'll just see what happens. So I'm going to run my node for my query parser, and I see, okay, so I have an array, and I have name equals John as a string, color equals red as a string, and age equals 29 as a string. So we're getting there. Now what we have to do is loop through these pairs and then break up this pair into just its actual name and value, or the key and value, whatever you want to call it. So let's do that. So I'm going to say pairs dot for each pair. Now I'm going to have another variable here. I'm going to call it the parts of the pair, and this is just going to be the pair dot split on equal sign here. So parts 0 should be my name, right, or color or age, and then parts 1 should be my actual value, my John, my red, my 29, or my eggs, my 2, my milk, right? So now we just need a place to store this. So the easiest way would be, I'm going to just do something like create an empty object here, and I can say object at parts 0 equals parts 1, and then I'm going to return my object here. So let's see how close we are here. So if I run this, I see, okay, cool, I see name is John, color red, age 29. My second one, empty object, or this here it's undefined. That's kind of surprising, I didn't expect that, but okay. And then here we have item milk and quantity 2. So one thing that this, I guess, confused a lot of people is here we have item in here twice. And I did that very intentionally to point out that your keys can only have one value to them, right? So if you have a key of item, which is assigned to eggs, and you replace that key with milk, you're going to end up with milk here, not with eggs, or you're not going to end up with an array or anything like that. Are you guys with me so far?
Yeah, I was totally wrong.
So, and let's look at this and see why this is actually giving me my empty string here. Because if I actually split this, so my pair split. So let's do just a little debugging here. So I'm going to just throw in a console.log of pairs here and see what this actually does. So my pairs here. Oh, okay, so it's an empty string. So one way that we can avoid this empty key is equal to undefined right here is just add a check that if pair is basically an empty string, just return out. So if we do that, we see here's my first one, here's my second one, and here is my third one. So there are a couple really elegant ways that we could do this. We could do this with a reduce. We could do this with essentially a spread operator. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but I think this is the easiest way to do it, even though it's definitely not the most aesthetic or elegant way to do it. Do you guys have any questions or comments on that?
It makes sense now.
Makes sense. Danny, what do you think? Okay. Cheryl, you good with that?
Yeah, I started off the wrong foot.
Yeah, and that's my fault because you guys have only heard of query parameters in the context of Express, so everyone had Express somewhere in their program there. So that is my fault, my failure for not giving you guys enough detail or better example, so I apologize for that. So
Can you share that code with us?
yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take and commit everything here that we're doing in the homework. I think we have one more assignment, and I'll just commit this so that way you guys actually have it and can learn from it.
Awesome.
So let's see. Okay, so the second one was create a simple voting application. I think everybody knocked this out. I think Elena, you did, Linda, and Cheryl. So let's see how we did that. So I'm gonna create a new one here called. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm not screen sharing anymore. Okay, let's try this again. Guys, if I'm ever talking about code or something on screen that you're not seeing, you need to call me out and let me know that, hey, you're not sharing your screen anymore. So okay, so with voting, our goal, let's read the instructions really quick, is create a very simple voting application. You'll be able to vote for the first item by going to WAC A and the second item by going to WAC B. And okay, so I missed the link there, no big deal. The routes will return the current votes for each item. It can be as JSON or HTML. Did anyone have trouble understanding the instructions here? So I know how much to put in. Did that make sense to you guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So first thing we're gonna do is set up an Express server, right? So const express equals require express. I need to make sure that Express is installed here in my homework directory. So here I'm going to do a npm install Express. While that's installing, I'm going to set up my actual Express application. I'm going to say app.listen on port 3000. And here we have the very, very basics of an Express server, right? So now what we want is to have two different endpoints. So I'm going to do app.get WAC A, and then we have our request and our response handlers. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for WAC B. So far so good. So we have kind of the skeleton here. So now what we need is anytime that there's a vote and something is counting, we know that it has to be stateful, right? So we need a variable to hold the current state. So I'm going to do var votes. That's fine. Votes A will start at 0 and votes B will start at 0. So we can do something that you hit A and we're going to say votes A plus plus, and then we can just do a res.json of votes A. And we can do something very similar to B here. So votes B, res.json of B. So if we run this thing now, and we go to localhost 3000, nailed it. Okay, so WAC A, okay, I see 1, and I'm hitting F5 here, and I see 7, 8, 9, very cool, okay, and I see B, and cool, I can vote a bunch for B, so okay, so this is good. Right now, we're just getting the output of one vote at a time, so let's change this around so we can see the output of both, right? So here, I can just go ahead and return an object here of votes A and votes B. And how many of you guys with ES6 know that if your key or the name of your property is the same as the value of the property, you can list only one? Are you guys comfortable with that? So instead of me doing votes A colon votes A and votes B colon votes B, I can just do votes A comma votes B. Is that scary to anybody?
No.
No? Okay. The last thing I'm going to do is just add another route handler for just the root here for our request and our response. And all it's going to do is just return the number of votes. So I can see what votes there are without making any changes to the votes. So now, oops, and I didn't run this in node mod, so I'm going to have to restart. Okay, so now if I just go to WAC, I see votes A 0, votes B 0. Okay, awesome. I can go to A here. I can keep voting. I can go to B here and keep voting. So pretty awesome. So we have a voting machine now. Really awesome. What questions do you guys have on this assignment here?
Percy,
Yep.
I did the assignment correct, but I didn't do anything for just a whack.
Oh, I just added that in there. You guys didn't have to, so I didn't even request that. So
Okay.
yeah, don't worry about that.
Okay, I didn't get that in the assignment. Okay.
Yeah. That is, as long as you guys got the spirit of it, that's all I care about. So Elena, and I think you knocked that out of the park too, right?
Yep.
Okay. And Linda?
Yeah, I got it. No question. Okay, that's fine.
Okay. You said you got that?
Yeah, she got it.
Okay, awesome. So sorry, we'll come up. I think Seth, the protocol would be you can keep yours unmuted, but when I call on somebody, you'll mute yours and they'll unmute theirs, or maybe I don't know. We'll figure this out. So we have like 2 more classes, and we'll get this hopefully streamlined. So okay. Oh, let's start on our stuff today. So what we're gonna go over. One thing, guys. We're gonna cut class a little early today, probably at 11:30, because I'm flying to Bulgaria at 4, and apparently the TSA lines in Minnesota are the second largest in the nation because of Trump and his government shutdown. So I'm gonna have to leave super early. So I apologize for that. I was originally hoping that we could have the full class, but Seth has been so gracious to teach you guys all the advanced topics. Seth is super excited.
Yep.
So let's go over what we're gonna do today here. So I did a very simple overview here. So one thing that we're gonna talk about, promises here, and I'm gonna give you guys a really simple example. Promises are probably one of the hardest concepts in JavaScript and programming in general that you're going to come across. It takes students a really long time to really get comfortable and wrap their heads around it. So we're going to take baby steps. Seth, you're a great example. How long did it take you before you got really comfortable with promises?
I'm probably still trying to get comfortable with them, I would say. But I mean, so where I'm not scared of them all the time, it probably took like 2 or 3 months.
Okay, so that gives you just a heads up. So whenever we're gonna go through some of these promises, and it's gonna seem really foreign, I just don't want you guys to beat yourself up or think like, "Whoa, I am totally out of my depth." That is not it at all. These are just really complex topics, and unfortunately, we have to learn a little bit about them so we can start using them, because we have a lot of. Basically, we're gonna just learn about promises for the Fetch API. So. Let's start really quick. Just promises are for asynchronous programming. So when I say asynchronous, I'm talking about a program that doesn't run linear. So right now, so let's do an example here. That's fine. So if I have something like console list, here I'm going to start, I'm going to end, and in here I could do a for loop, right? So this here, no one's going to be surprised that we start here at start, we have our for loop, and we end in here. Let's give this a little bit more context here. So I equals I, and let's not do 100, just do 10 here. So if I run this, I see start, I see, I 0 through 9 and end, right? Everything works beautifully. So what promises allow us to do is run code asynchronously, meaning that it doesn't always go start, middle, and end. So if instead we had something, so if I had this thing wrapped in a promise. So let's do this. So this is going to be function. I'm going to say call this function count. So still, so far nothing has changed, right? I'm just going to move my function definition down here. So if I run this again, I'm not going to see any change, right? Everything is good. Well, I can have my count function return a promise instead. So I can do something that says return new, and this is going to look really scary to you guys, and resolve reject, then whatever I want in here, and then I'm going to resolve it. I can do something like this, and now I run this, and okay, cool. So this here is going to give me the exact same thing. So here, let's try to turn this into promise chain. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me give you guys a better example here. So instead of doing this, let's do the example of for at least async of set timeout. So if I'm going to do a timeout here, and say this is 100 milliseconds. So this is probably a much better example than what I was trying to do. I run this, I'm going to see my start, my end, and my timeout, right? So, and if we have one timeout in here, this isn't really hard to follow. You guys have seen timeout or set timeout before, right?
Can you explain it? I don't think everyone's seen it.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So, set timeout is a way for us to call a function a certain number of milliseconds later in the future. So if I set this to 1000, this will run a full second later. There'll be a second delay timeout, and then notice the program exits. So, and I could do multiple timeouts here, right? And notice what happens though. It's not going to be timeout runs, it waits a whole second, then timeout 2 starts, it waits a whole second, then timeout 3 starts, it waits a whole second. Look what happens. We have start, end, and then all my timeouts happen at once, right? So let's pause for a second before I continue. I just want to make sure everybody understands what's going on here.
We got it.
Okay. Danny, you're good with that?
Yes.
Okay. So if we did want this to say timeout 1, then start the second time, or then the third, we would have to do something that is affectionately known as callback hell, where we're going to stack these things like this. So we're going to start our timeout. It'll start our second timeout inside there, then it'll start our third timeout. Timeout 1, timeout 2, timeout 3. So, well, that's definitely not very, and especially if I wanted more of these things, like for example, if I wanted this thing 10 levels deep, this would just be a huge pain, right? So what promises do is allow us to a much cleaner way to do asynchronous programming, because basically and when I say asynchronous, I just mean something that runs in the background. A timer is in the background. Whenever we're doing, for example, express request, these things here run in the background. Our program, if we do a console.log of start here and a console.log of end here, we're going to see start, end, and these things here just run in the background. They're part of the event loop. So same thing with timers, same things with a request out to network services that we'll talk about here in a second as well. So all those things are asynchronous. Or if we're reading a file from the hard drive, that's also asynchronous. We can read a file and it doesn't pause, it doesn't freeze our entire program while it's running. So one way that we can clean this up is by using promises. So here, I'm going to make a simple function called timer. And what we're going to do here is just return a new promise. And notice that this promise is with a capital P, meaning it's a class. So, and that's why we have to use a new keyword with it. Resolve and reject. And we're not going to use reject for a little bit, and I'll talk about that here momentarily. But basically what we want to do is set timeout. Our function inside of here, all it's going to do is, let's just have it say here timeout done, and we're going to call resolve. That's it. So what we can do now is I can call this timer. Whenever you have a promise, this returns an object, a promise object that has something called a dot then, so it's chainable. So see, I have a dot catch on here and a dot then. So dot then means after this is run, I want to run this next piece of code. So, and in here, I can do console.log, I can do whatever. So here, if I just do this as console.log of done, let's see what this looks like. Oops, and I'm sorry, I forgot to give my timeout actual timeout. Okay. Start and timeout done, done. Okay. Well, with dot then, because we're just giving another function here, I can say dot then timer. And I can do that as many times as I want. I can do something like this. I see timeout done, timeout done. Notice that this here is much cleaner, much easier to follow than this example here. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
So this year I'm also going to do something called async and await, but we're going to wait a second because I think some of you guys know about async and await, but I want to take baby steps here. But this here is all we're going to learn about promises today is that basically they are chainable, that you have something that returns a promise, you can do a dot then, it returns another promise, and it'll keep going till the very last handler, the last promise handler. Do you guys have any questions about this? I know this is kind of a lot to throw at you, so.
I think I just need to see it more.
Okay, yeah. Elena, are you familiar with promises?
No.
Okay, well this is gonna be great then. Okay, so here I'm gonna try to name these things something sane for you guys. One more quick way that to show you guys promises that on the front end, for example, here I'll just pull up a Chrome console. Is we have all modern browsers have a bunch of APIs built in, right? We have service workers that you can run code in the background. You have a fetch API that we're going to use momentarily, and there's also a battery API. So if we use get battery here, it'd be really cool to know what my battery state is, right? I run this. Look what it says. This thing here returns something called promise. Well, that's useless to me. I don't know, where's my stuff in here, but I see that somewhere inside of this object, I see charging, I see my discharge time, I see a bunch of information. I can get that out by using a dot then, because this here is returning a promise. So I can say dot then, whatever the result of this is, just console.log it. So if I run this, I see now that my battery this is the result right here. Charging, discharge time. So kind of cool that I can get information about my laptop, right? So this is something that you guys can play with and have fun with yourselves here. So the other thing that we're going to look at here in a second is the fetch API. That instead of hitting things through the URL, we can use fetch to mimic a client. Because right now, so far, that everything that we've seen with Express, it has been with creating an Express server, something to catch those requests, to process those requests. But we haven't seen anything to make those requests, right? So far, we've been using our browsers to make all the requests. But we can use the fetch API. And now if I just run this here. Oh, I'm sorry, my server's not running anymore. Okay, I panicked there for a second. That's the fun thing about doing the live examples in class is they never go the way that you want, and that's okay. Oops, sorry, I need to go into homework here. Okay. So if I restart my voting server here and I try to fetch I see that it returns promise pending. Well, that doesn't do me any good. I see that I have stuff in here. Okay, that's anytime you run something and returns a promise, you know immediately that, oh, I can do a dot then on here, and I can pass this at least to console.log and see what's going on. So I pass this to console.log.
Put the R in. Forgot it. For the result.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Seth, you're awesome. You're a lifesaver. Okay. I see my response is this crazy thing here. So, well, this isn't helpful to me. I don't know where my value is. Because I expected votes A and votes B somewhere to be in here. It's not really... I don't see where it is in here. The fetch API, it's a little bit difficult to use because before you can use your value, you have to do... And let's do this in steps here. If I say var promise with the lowercase p equals my fetch A, I can do promise equals promise dot... Well, first of all, let me just do this here. If I do a promise.json to get the result of this... Oops, let's try this. Promise.then of whatever that value is. So that response has another function that we can call on it. This is our response of JSON. Then finally that JSON, we can go ahead and do a console.log on it. And sorry guys, this is probably a bad way to show you this all in one line. So, but doing this here, I see that here is finally the value that I'm looking for from here. So this as a one-liner, here let's clean this up a little bit, is just going to be our fetch request, whatever our URL is. We're going to say dot then, our response, we're going to convert that to JSON. And then we're going to go ahead and console.log out our data. So if I do something like this, I see that I can run this as many times as I want and my voting works, right? One more shorthand, guys. If you ever have a function that you're just passing in whatever value is passed in, you're passing into that function, you can skip all this and just do console.log as a function, not calling it. Notice here I don't have the open close parentheses because this means that this function is going to be called and whatever arguments are passed into my .then handler are going to be passed directly into my console.log. So if I run this, I'm going to see that it's going to be exactly the same. And obviously if I hit whack B, same thing. Everybody sounds frightened now. What do you guys think about this?
I think I understand the concept of it. I think I understand the concept of it, but it's a lot.
So they might have to turn. Someone had to just like turn down their volume on their laptops there. So only one person has volume.
Okay, good. We're good now.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand the concept of it, but in terms of putting it all together, I'm a little lost.
Well, I can promise you guys this, that for this week's homework, a lot of it will involve promises, and I will take it extremely, extremely slow because I want you guys to get the hang of it. This here, we just went through a lot. I just want to show you where promises have real-world value and application immediately, right? That this isn't some kind of ethereal concept that I'm wasting your guys' time with. This promises will, for better or worse, become part of your everyday lives, and they are a huge time saver. Once you're comfortable with them and they don't feel like a burden on your existence, you'll learn to like them. So let me do just a couple more examples with promises. Here we had our promise timer. I'm going to do one more to show you how promises are changed. So here, okay. So if we have, for example, we can have promises and use them as if they were synchronous. So if I have, for example, a function called add, and I have my A and B, I can always return a plus b, right? But if I try to chain this, if I say, hey, add 15 and 4 dot then console.log, I think no one here will be surprised. Let's go in the right folder. Let me know if you guys need this bigger or not. I'm not sure what screens you guys are looking at over there, so. So here we're gonna get an error, right? Because I'm trying to call dot then essentially on a number, right? This is the equivalent of saying 20 dot then. The number 20 doesn't have any methods on it, so I can't do this. So one way around that is I could create a whole promise chain. I could say return a new promise, resolve, reject, and resolve a plus b. If I did this whole huge scary thing, then my code actually works, right? There's my 20. Well, if you don't need an actual promise wrapper, the shorthand for this, instead of all this craziness, is just return promise.resolve of a plus b. And this will wrap whatever value you have in a promise. So, and there is my 20. So, the benefit of this is that I can now do things with dot then. So now, for example, if I have, instead of console.logging here, I can say dot then, and whatever my answer is, I can say, go ahead and add my answer and add 1 to it. I can run this now, I see 21. Or I could go ahead and, I can have multiple. So here, let's go ahead. I'm going to create another function called double for whatever number I have. And all I'm going to do is just return my number times 2. Right? So I could do something like this, and then I can say, hey, dot then double. And now one thing that you guys should notice is that I'm not wrapping this in a promise.resolve. So let's see what happens here. If I run this, I see 42. The reason I don't have to wrap this in a promise.resolve is once it's part of a promise chain, promises are smart enough to continue wrapping the values. But if I move my double up in the very front instead of my addition here, and I say double of 5 dot then and add to it, if I do this, I'm going to get an error because obviously double doesn't return a promise. So, and again, I can do promise.resolve of whatever's in here. If I do that, then that will fix it, and then I can continue to do this. So, promises are really useful because you can chain various things onto here. Like, it will just make this a little bit more concrete. Instead of doing add with arguments, I'm just going to say add 1, and this here is just going to return. Here's my number, and I'm just going to do n plus 1. So here I can just go ahead and call add 1. I can call double. I can do any one of these things, and you can see how short this is, right? How easy this is to do, and I can do as many of these things as I want there. So it is just a different way to, and you guys are thinking like, well, this is stupid, Sergi, because I can go ahead and add numbers without all of your fancy dot thens and your, promise.resolve. I don't need that to add and multiply numbers. Well, this here represents asynchronous functions, and here in a little bit, as long as I don't overwhelm you guys, we'll get to that where pretend instead of this being something like adding numbers together, what if instead we had something that we were making calls to the server, that we were doing something like get students, the student ID, dot then get grades for that student, dot then enroll that student. Dot then create report. So if get student calls a service on some server that gets a database, right? That's asynchronous. I wouldn't be able to do that as a synchronous program. I wouldn't be able to say var student equals get student. That wouldn't work if this requires me going out to the internet to a database or whatever, because get students is asynchronous. Same thing if getting the grades for the students is also part of is on a database on the server somewhere, that has the same problem. That's asynchronous. And enrolling them, that's also a database call. Creating a report, that could be just rendering something to screen. But promises let you really quickly do all the hard, heavy lifting things that some programming languages like C, C++, you don't have a concept of promises, and it is much more difficult to do these asynchronous operations. And we'll do a student and grade example here in a little bit, I promise. So, do you guys have any more questions on this here before we continue?
We're good here.
Okay, Elaine, are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, everybody looks kind of frightened. Okay, Danny, you're good? Okay, you're muted, so I assume you're good.
We're all good.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot Danny for some reason. It looks like he's in his house, but he's in the... Okay, very good, sorry. Okay. My bad, okay. Well, here, let's continue on here. So the Fetch API, we've kind of talked about this. A lot of these things are really intertwined, so I went through them in a logical way, but unfortunately that's not going to work. But let's go ahead and just start using our Fetch API, and let's basically take our voting example and make it a little bit more robust, where we actually have a front end that we can do different things with it. So let's do that. So first thing that we're going to, first of all, let me just take a step back and make sure, I just want to make sure that you guys 100% understand the client-server relationship, where the browser and server start and end, where the user comes into play, and I just want to make sure that there's no fuzziness there, because if those are really important concepts, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page there. Do you guys understand when I say a client or a server, what that means and kind of their roles?
Yeah.
Yes?
I think I do. I think I do.
Okay, so the client is generally anything a web browser can do. So pretend a client, 99.9% of the time is going to be a web browser. So, and the server is whatever that web browser is hitting. So here, I'm not screen sharing. Okay, so let's go ahead and screen share again. Okay, so here this is my client, my actual Chrome web browser, and then the server is github.com, because that's where my client is pointed to. So whenever we create these examples in Express, we're creating our very own server, and we kind of briefly talked about this before, that you create a server and you can indeed hit this from the internet, that you can go ahead and actually have a website that's out on the internet, which is really cool, which is for a few lines of code. It's really amazing that you can do that. So, and the client is basically anything that causes a request to happen. So whenever you see the rec and res, rec is our request, and this is our response. This is our request from the client. So this is from the client, and our response is back to the client. Okay, so far so good? Okay, so let's put some of these things here that we've talked about together. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and we'll call this voting, and I'm going to do the same, kind of the same exact thing that I did before. I'm going to create a server.js, const express, require express, const our app is just going to be a new Express server. I'm going to do this.listen on port 3000. And this is the very basics of Express server that doesn't do anything. So one thing that we can do our voting example again, right? So we can do var here. I'll just do votes 1, votes 2, app.get here a request response. Sorry guys, this is bad form. I'm using votes 1 here and I'm using whack A. So here, let me actually change these. Okay, so this is our very basic voting program that we had. Well, if I want to make this more graphical, for example, that I want to go and, because if I hit this right now, oops. So cool. Well, if I hit this right now, I'm going to get that obviously because I don't have a root request or a root route. But this here, this isn't very graphical. What if I wanted to make this that we have 2 buttons, right? Like an image for our item that we want to vote for A and another image for what we want to vote with B, right? So that there, we could do some craziness. Instead of doing a res.json, we could do res.send, and we could here send, we can send HTML code back here. So we could do something, clearly we can send HTML code back, so we can probably figure out a way to inject an image in here, have that image clickable where it goes to a different URL that will actually count the vote. That there can get really hairy really quickly. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to allow Express to serve us a front end. So, and we briefly went over this last week where we had our static, where essentially we can use express.static to serve static files for us. So we're going to do this same thing here basically. So I'm going to first create a place called public, our directory here. And inside of here, let's go ahead and create index.html. So now let's go ahead and have this serve our front end. So we're going to say app.use express.static. And this here is going to be our current directory whack public. So here, is there an autocomplete? Seth, do you know for VS Code? Adam had this awesome autocomplete that you can just do HTML tab. That's a real bummer that VS Code doesn't have that.
I've never used VS Code. I know Adam.
Okay.
There is autocomplete. Okay. Danny says there's autocomplete.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate. Okay, so here we have a very basic HTML page here. So if I go to just whack, I should see vote here. So clearly we're returning our HTML page. Well, let's go ahead and kind of what I said is just add a couple images in here and make them clickable to vote. So right now, first I want to make sure everybody's comfortable where we are. So because we have now a front end and a back end as well. So this here, everything that the client is seeing now, this is our front end. Unfortunately, we don't actually have. Here, let's refresh this. This here, this is our front end. This is what's presented to the client, right? So, and our backend code is here. So, and you'll see in a second why there's why it's really important to keep track of those things. So, let's go back over here, and I want to go ahead and sure. Let's see if I can find. Sure, we'll use that. Why not? So here, image source. And we'll kind of use the same exact image for the second one. Okay, awesome. Not very creative, but we basically want these that we can click on them and have a tally of the number of votes on the bottom, right? So, first of all, let's go ahead and create this without even using our back end. So let's pretend this was just a simple front-end application, right? So stuff that you guys did in module, 2 and 3? So if I was doing that, and we could do this with, are you guys comfortable with jQuery, or do you guys want me to show you this stuff cool without jQuery?
It's all the same to us.
All the same? Okay, so here, let's go ahead and do a jQuery CDN. Script tag, okay. Okay. So far, so good. So we basically just want to give these things IDs here. So I'm going to say, or classes. Here I'm going to call this thing button 1. This one here is just going to be button 2. And we essentially just want to add some JavaScript that runs whenever either one is clicked, right? So here I'm going to add a script tag in here. I believe it's on already. It's a little bit embarrassing. I've not used jQuery in so long. Is it on already? Nope. Okay, so we'll ignore that completely. Okay. So here we're gonna say .btn1 and here we'll use ES6 here. Okay, so kind of the setup here is not defined. Well, okay, that is my bad here. So this is here, not URL, this is source. Okay. Yay, okay, so now I have my different votes for it, right? So now let's go ahead and just add a place that we can go ahead and show the votes here. So I'm just gonna do span a class of votes 1 here. votes 2. Let's see what this looks like. This probably look pretty hideous. Okay, well, you guys can use your imagination that this is clean and professionally designed. So what we can do now is, here's our button handlers. We can go ahead and say var votes 1 is going to be dot votes 1. Is this a surprise to anybody here with the jQuery? Okay, very good. So I'm going to say votes 1 here dot. I'm sorry.
I think you have to have a dot val.
Well, I want to get the just the reference to it, and then here I'm going to do the dot val or the dot html here. So to oh, actually, I'm sorry. So you're right. Let me just do this as votes 1, the actual element, because I need a separate counter for. So I essentially need a counter to count the number of votes, and then I need a pointer for the elements. Or I could go ahead and just say votes 1 here like this and get rid of this completely. Dot val is going to be just plus of votes 1. So, and those guys, if you do a plus beforehand instead of after, it will add 1 to it before returning it. So this here is the equivalent of me doing votes 1 plus. So that is just another good old JavaScript shorthand there. And this is votes 2. Okay, and let's see what this looks like. Oh, look at that, guys. I nailed it. Okay, so let's see what's going wrong here. Because clearly it is not changing any of my values here. So well, let's debug this a little bit. So this is, oh, you know what's interesting? Cool. So yeah, sorry, it wasn't val. It was going to be the .html because I need to get the actual HTML in there because val is only for input. So there we go. Okay.
There we go.
So yay, we have a simple voting machine, right? But well, simple is right because as soon as I refresh, everything resets to 0, right? And this is where a server really has its power, right, and utility, because instead of it resetting to 0, if this was from the these values for the votes stored on the server, it obviously wouldn't reset, and then I could have multiple tabs, and I could see the votes happening, you know, in multiple places. So let's go ahead and, first of all, does anyone have any questions about this before we continue on? I want to make sure everybody's comfortable here with this, because this might be a review for some of you. It was definitely a review for me, because I totally forgot all my jQuery, so. Are you guys good with this? Okay. Okay, so let's take this and now change this so we can go ahead and get votes from the server, right? So what we can do is, since we have these routes already, whack A, we've already seen that I could basically, instead of doing all this, so here, I'll just comment these things here out. I can use the fetch API and say whack A dot then our response, we have to convert it to JSON, which is a pain, dot then votes, and here I'm just going to do a console.log of the votes so we can just see that. So if I click this now after refreshing, alright, syntax error, that's exciting. Did it at least send my request? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I butchered my backend server to, instead of sending JSON, it's sending HTML, so okay. So cool. So now I see here's my actual results back. So this is cool. So I can go ahead and take this, and now here I can go ahead and say votes1.html is going to be votes, and I apologize, I keep waffling back and forth between 1 and A and 2 and B, so forgive me. So, and we can do the same exact thing here for when we press the second button, right? So we're going to vote for B here. And oh, actually, so here, let's go ahead and that's actually fine. We'll leave this alone here. So now look, if I refresh this, it goes back to 0, 0. But if I click something, I see I'm at 5. If I click this, I see I'm at 10. Well, it sounds like we need a way to get the current votes, because as soon as we load the page, we need to get the current number of votes, right? So we have the basics here. We just need to put this together a little bit better. First of all, let's go ahead and say that whenever 1 is voted for, so if I vote for example, A, I want to get B's as well. Since the server is returning the votes for B, let's go ahead and just update it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this because my votes object here has votes A and votes B in it, right? So and I'm going to do the exact same thing when you press the B button. So I see both of them. So the other thing I want to do is as soon as our script loads, I want to go out and immediately get the votes and update our values. So right now, I don't have a route for that because right now if I run this, it's going to freak out saying that, hey, whack votes 404 not found, right? So let's go back to our backend server here and app.get whack votes, and we're not going to increase anything. We're just going to get the total tallies right now. So okay, my server restarted, so we're back at 0, 0. So if I click this, so if I refresh now, I should be at 2, 2. And indeed, I am at 2, 2. So awesome. So now I can open this up in another window. So I have 2, 5. And if I click on even on A, it'll update. So we have something pretty cool here, guys, that is actually stateful because I can, I can close my laptop, I can come back to this later, and it will still keep my votes that I've done. So we just covered a lot right now, so I want to give you guys a chance to process and ask questions about that.
Sergi,
Yes.
on the .html, is that referring to the front end? That's what I'm getting.
Yep, that's the front end. So anything that runs in this index.html, this is running on the front end. So we're having our front end trigger different routes on the back end. So, and these here, I forgot so really quick, if your server is serving things at the root like this, you don't technically need the whack before it. It is really good, a really good habit to get into, putting that whack, that / before all your routes, because it will save you a lot of heartache later when you're doing more complex applications. So what other questions do you guys have? Because I know this is kind of a lot here.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with the fetch piece on just how that comes into play. Is it basically just going to get the information from? I'm just a little confused on that problem.
Yeah, so the fetch is the equivalent of whatever our browser is doing. So whenever we go to fetch whack votes, if I went to that in my browser, obviously if I go to whack votes in my browser right now, am I screen sharing? Okay, I am. If I go here to whack A, that's not going to work. But if I go to localhost :3000 whack votes, for example, whatever this returns, this is what our fetch returns. So this here is just a way to take, instead of presenting this to the browser, it returns it back in code that we're going to take this, and this res to res.json, all that's doing is taking this raw text.
Hey, we're getting kicked out of our room, so you want to take a 5-minute break and we'll find another room?
Oh no, why are we getting kicked out?
Apparently somebody else has it booked.
Oh, we should have it booked every Saturday. Okay, well, I will check that. No problem. Guys, let's take a 5-minute break.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay. The other thing you're gonna run into whenever you're doing this as a GET request, like as query parameters, is that these things can be cached. Your browser can cache this, or your browser can, as soon as you start, like if I went to this URL a bunch of time, I could go to whack. Notice that I have these things it's already seen before. Well, Google and a lot of other browsers in the background, it'll pull this up and it will, before you even click on it, I have this hovered, it will make a request to it to start loading it in the background. So I could be trying to go to Wax Surgery to try to get the information and accidentally hover over this, and I could overwrite whatever that critical information is by accident. Does that make sense? Okay, very good. So the lesson to learn is basically don't try to use GET requests to store information, right? Because they can be cached, they can be hit accidentally, just a lot of things can go wrong with them. So what we want to do is, instead of doing something like this, we just want to use a post. So if I say post at item, and my item here is, instead of doing rec.params, it's just going to be rec.body. So whatever's posted will show up in rec.body. So this here is a lot cleaner, because notice I have my route here is whack item and whack item. But my methods is get and post, so that's the difference. So far, so good? Okay, so let's go to the front end now. So I'm basically, let me just delete all this so we can start fresh. So I'm going to have a function here that says get item, and this thing here is going to return our fetch API here, and I'm going to do a dot then my response to JSON. Actually, that's all I need to do. I just need to turn this back into JSON, and that's it. So let me do a console.log here. Oops, and I'm sorry, I won't be able to do that because this here is a promise. If I do a console.log of get item, let's see what happens here. So I go to my front end, I see my express post, and I see console.log return a promise. Cool, not very useful, right? So what I need to do is do get item dot then whatever the item is, and do a console.log like this. Because get item is asynchronous because it's returning a promise. So now if we run this, I see that awesome get item return nothing. So, well, we could do something very similar and create a function called save item. Here's the item that we want to save. And now remember, we have a couple of hoops here, right? So we're going to do a fetch to whack item. And here, fetch takes a second argument of options. So, and there's quite a few that we need to put in here. We need to tell it the method is post, because there's get, there's fetch, there's delete, there's put, there's patch. There's like 9 or 10 different HTTP verbs that you could use, but we'll only use get and post. So in class, because I don't think you need the rest of them. They're not really valuable. So okay, so our body here is going to be our JSON.stringify of item, and then finally we need to add in the headers to tell our server that what we're sending it is the right information. So, and I don't remember these off the top of my head, so I'm just going to copy paste these. So, okay. So now I should be able to call save item and give it, for example, something besides a string. So I'm going to save an array of 1, 2, 3 in here. So if I run this, refresh, I see nothing. Well, it's okay, because basically this here ran before this, so I should refresh again though, and I should see, okay, I see 1, 2, 3 as actual numbers there. Pretty cool. So now we can save kind of whatever we want. We can save any complex object in here. And then be able to get it. So very, very cool. Let me slow down for a second and ask if you guys have any questions so far. Because a lot of you, I want to make sure this isn't academic to you. I want to make sure that you guys see real world application here. So if you don't, please speak up and ask like, hey, Sergi, why would you use this? Why couldn't you, go through life just using, GET requests? You kind of could. You'll run into problems, and life won't be as great as learning the dot posts.
So do you use post when you're going to change the data?
Yep. Post is, so if you follow, there's something called CRUD. Create, update, read, and destroy or delete, right? So CRUD initially, when the web came out, you had for create, it was a post. For read, it was a get. For update, it was a put. And for destroy, it was delete. Or for delete, it was delete. So you had 4 different verbs that you could use for that. I think that's overkill. And for everything I do, I combine the create and update together, where basically a post is used for anything that you're updating or creating. So this here, notice that this is kind of tied to our item here specifically, but we can take this and make this much more generic. So because copying or doing this every single time is a huge pain. So let's go ahead and make these things a little bit more generic. So I want to go ahead and just call this.
Settings, Sergi.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I love it. Okay. So here, get item and save item. Notice that if we had, for example, get votes A, get votes B, vote for A, vote for B. This would be a lot of code that we would cut and paste. But we can go ahead and make these a little bit more generic by just pulling out the actual URL. So I'm going to call this just get or a get request, and then it will take an argument of URL. That's it. So it will take the argument, and we can make this as a one-liner. Oh, yeah, in JavaScript, spacing doesn't mean anything. So you normally, when you have a promise chain, you would put that on the next line and indent it. If it's literally just one thing and it's short, I usually have it on one line. It is just up to your comfort level, because this might be, if you're a beginner and you're not used to promises, this might be really hard to read. So we can go ahead and just do that. That makes it easier. So same thing here for our save item. I'm going to call this a post request. And this here is going to be our URL and then our body that we're going to post. So again, we're going to post this to URL, and then our body is just going to be stringified just the same. So nothing changes. So now these here are generic functions that we can use in any of our future programs. So get item now changes to get request of whack item. And save item changes to post request of whack item, comma, our actual payload that we're sending. So, and indeed, if we refresh here, we're going to see the exact same thing. So let's make one more change, because I want to make sure you guys understand the asynchronous nature. If I do something like, I want to post here, of item being new, how can I get this? Or let me ask you guys this. If I post new and then I do a get request immediately, what is going to be console.logged? What is going to be returned here when I refresh this? What do you guys think? Guessing new. Okay, I love it. So okay, first of all, we got an error posting. So one more slight technicality. Whenever you're doing a post request, it has to be a JavaScript object. Seth knows this. You can't do any elementary, what are they called? Any primitives. You can't post, like, for example, I can't post a number, I can't post a string, and I can't post a Boolean value like true or false or null or anything, just because JSON.parse or JSON.stringify doesn't handle those very well at all. So we always have to just wrap it in an object. So just something to be aware of. Normally you wouldn't post just a string or a number, so that's okay. But just something to be aware of. So, okay. Let's try this again. So if I refresh here, I see that it returned name new. So this actually did work. What I was hoping to happen, and actually if we can fake this, if our server wasn't on our same machine, that there's a little bit of delay. For example, if I go to network and I change this to be fast 3G, and let's refresh this, I see that I got new here. Even though if I look at my network tab, I sent out the post request, right, to update this to new whatever 44. But if I look at my waterfall, this is almost useful here. I see that this here, my GET request, that got the value from the server, returned slightly sooner than my post request. So basically, my post started running and my GET request returned first. Right, so this is called a race condition, because if I look at my code, I'm telling it to post, then I'm telling it to get my request. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? So, because these are asynchronous, anything with fetch, anything that involves promises, it's going to start this, and JavaScript is going to just keep on running. It's not going to wait till this is finished. So if I want to wait for this to be finished, I need to do a dot then, and I don't care about the result here. I just need to say a dot then, and throw this inside of here. So basically I'm saying, hey, post this first, then get the request, and then console.log it out. So, and we'll see a way to clean this up here in a second, but let's go ahead and try this. I'm going to say that this now is going to post new to. So if I refresh this, notice that we had here, it got the server, it did my post, it finished, and then it started my GET request. If I look at my console, I see indeed it returned new to. You guys with me so far? Kind of. Okay. Kind of is good. So let's clean this up a little bit, because this here is a little bit hard to follow, right? So we can go ahead and say that, hey, post first. Yes?
Don't we have to have a promise in there? Was a question.
So, very astute question. .fetch returns our promise for us automatically. So right here, we see that this is really hard to read, but this is saying that the fetch function takes one input of this format here, and there's an object here. But after the colon, this is what it returns. It returns a promise that wraps a response. So on the dot then, what you have is the response in there. So fetch returns the promise for us. So we can reformat this, and let me just copy paste this. This here can be reformatted as do the post dot then do the request dot then console.log it out. So this is slightly easier to read than this here, right? Yeah. So one more thing that we can do. Actually, I'm not going to do it. I want to show you guys async and await because it'll make your lives easier. But I want to really make sure that you guys get a handle on this. But these two things here are equivalent. So I'm going to erase this because this is much easier to follow. So we have about 45 minutes. I want you guys, I'm going to commit this right now. Now I want you guys to try this, to try using, let's give you guys a more concrete assignment here. Do you guys, well, first of all, do you want an assignment or do you just want to play with this? I commit this and you guys just play with it, or do you guys want a goal or both?
Would be good.
Okay. So how about this? So now that you guys have seen how to use, this here, obviously I don't have any front end to this. What I would like for you guys to do, and, well, actually, with Seth here, we have till 1 o'clock. I think you guys can all do this. And this would be basically, I was going to sign this for homework anyways. What I want you guys to do is create a list application that we have an input field. I can type in eggs, or I can type in conquer the world, whatever kind of list I want, and it'll get saved on the server, and the server will return the list for me here. So using, you can use document.getElementById, or I would suggest using jQuery. So are you guys clear on that? Basically something that will use the front end and the back end, and you can post items to it, and it would be saved, and then it would be displayed for us.
Sounds good.
Sounds good? Okay. So let me commit this now. Have you guys seen Git before or used it? I think Preston said you guys did a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. GitHub. Yeah.
We'll cover, so just to give you guys a heads up what we're going to be doing next week and the week after. This week here, we're Promises and Express, we're going to wrap that up, and then we're going to go to databases next week. So we're going to talk about Mongoose and MongoDB, so the full mean stack experience, right? Because right now, everything we're doing, you refresh or if you change your server or restart your server, you lose all your data, right? So if your list was something actually important, you would lose that, and it would be sad. So storing it in a database, and we'll see a couple different ways how, because technically what we've been doing is a database. It's called an in-memory database. You have an array of items. That's an in-memory database. They're just not very useful because computer restarts, you change your program, it restarts, it's gone, right? And we'll talk about we can create our own little database by just saving a file to the server. And saving JSON, for example. We saw, JSON.stringify. We could save a text file to the server, and server restarts. It loads that text file again. That's awesome, but then you can have corruption, right? If somebody starts the same program twice, you can corrupt that file. There's pros and cons to that. So, but that's kind of a preview for next week. And then for the last week, we will create a full mean stack men stack application, everything except Angular. So we'll do the front end, the back end with the database, and it could be something even I hate to use a shopping list. I'll think of some cool thing for you guys to do, and then we'll post that to Git, and then we'll go ahead and probably use wow, I cannot think of it. There's a free service that we can go ahead and post our Node applications online for free. So we'll do that and actually have our applications posted on the net, so you guys can play with each other's and just really get the full feel of it. So for this here, one more thing. Let me just show you. I already committed this, but let me just show you before I leave. Whenever you're doing this post and request about your shopping list, you can have your backend server, store items as a array, and you could get items, return all of them. But when you're posting an item, you can just go ahead and say items.push item, right? That's what I would suggest. The way to do this is a really easy way, because then every single time you post something to it, it gets added to your list, and then you have one route to get all your items back. And and I'm not presenting. I'm sorry. Let's do that again. Sorry, so I changed our stuff here, and I'm not gonna commit this because it's just a. So instead of storing a single value like we're doing right now, we would store just an array of items, and you would get all of your items, right? Return the full array, and then when you post the item, all you would do is just say items.push whatever item onto there, and just return your item. So this here is essentially the backend for this little in-class project for you. So I just wanted you guys to see and not get hung up on trying to save this whole list of items on the front end, because you don't want to do that. You don't want your front end to ever be stateful. So when I say stateful, means that you're saving something. So whether that's in memory or on the disk or something, your front end should never hold information. It should always request it from the back end. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you guys have any questions before you start?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Do
Go
those
ahead.
file types matter? You were working in an HTML, but we were working in .js last week. Does it matter which one you're using?
What do you mean style types?
File types.
Oh, file types. I'm sorry. So this HTML, it's basically HTML, but we have a script tag in here. I could take all this out here and create. I'm not presenting. I'm sorry. Okay. So here, this is kind of what we have here, where it's HTML and JavaScript. I can take all this out and create something called, normally for some reason, app.js is what you use on the front end. I don't know why, which is confusing because you have an app on the back end. So you could call this front end or client or whatever makes sense to you. But then here, all we would do is say script source equals app.js. So then you don't have to worry about that at all. So here, our HTML now just has HTML code, and you can have all your, your input tags, your whatever that you need for your application, and then all your logic and stuff is inside of an app.js. So this is, whenever it's a small project, I'll do it inline, but this here is getting a little bit larger. So breaking up the two separate files is much easier, and it's less error prone. So excellent question. What other questions do you guys have? Okay, you guys want to give this a whirl, and then Seth, you'll be available to help them, right? And then I'll be here. I'll be walking around a little bit. I want to make sure I got everything packed up. I have to leave in 30 minutes. But if you guys have any questions, yeah, I will definitely be here to answer them.
Thanks, Sargy. Have a safe trip.
Okay, thank you guys. Let me know if you have any problems or questions. Okay, any problems or questions.